magnetic attractions outside of the negotiating room, whether that be violence, whether it be unilateralism of various kinds on both sides, traditionally hampered negotiations and kept the parties apart. Fourth, we must build trust and confidence between the parties. In negotiations, the parties don't have to just have confidence in each other, which is important, but they have to be able to carry their populations behind them. Those populations need to feel that they're not being demonised, they're not beleaguered, they're not isolated, and they're willing to support their own leaders, taking big risks for peace and making excruciating compromises for peace. Both sides will have to make excruciating compromises on issues that are central to their identity and to their history and to their narrative for this to be possible. That's only possible in turn if the populations behind do not feel completely beleaguered. Fifth point, what's the deal? I think the deal is the deal that Olmert, the Israeli Prime Minister, put down at Annapolis, which was not accepted by Mahmoud Abbas in 2008. Palestinian state on territory equivalent to the pre-67 West Bank and Gaza Strip with mutually agreed land swaps. City of Jerusalem to be shared. Neither side declaring sovereignty over the city's holy places. The Palestinian refugee problem being addressed within the framework of the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, which is that the new Palestinian state will become the home of the Palestinian refugees, just as the state of Israel will be the homeland of the Jewish people. And because Israel's security is vital to the implementation of any agreement, discussions around the demilitarization of the Palestinian state, with both states cooperating to fight terrorism and violence. I think that's the deal that will eventually be struck. The land swaps here or there will be debated, and it will be very difficult to get there. There's all sorts of issues around Golan Heights, water, etc., etc. But basically, that's the shape of the deal, I think. If it is, what's the route to the deal? I don't know what I've got left, but the route to the deal, I think, is someone once said the Israelis can satisfy the Palestinians' territorial demands when the Palestinians are able to satisfy Israel's existential demands. By that word, I just mean questions of existence, which is twofold. One, security, and two, the question of the refugees. The fear is that what's actually under discussion is not two states for two peoples, and that second clause is all important, for two peoples, but the recognition of one Palestinian Arab state now, and then a second Palestinian Arab state in time, achieved by return of the refugees and achieved by demographic change. That is not going to build the kind of confidence that either the peoples or the parties need to make negotiations a success. And in terms of how the parties are measuring up, if that is how to get to a deal, here's the claim I would make. I would make the claim that the territorial is not fundamentally the problem. I would say that if you look at what Barak offered at Camp David in 2000, what was offered at Tauba in 2001, what was offered by Olmert in 2007 at Annapolis, the territorial is not the problem. If you go back in time and you interview someone from the Likud and Labour in the 70s and then you come forward in time, what you'll find is this. Nobody is speaking like the Likud now. Nobody. Everybody is speaking like Labour. The basic acceptance has been made within Israeli society of the two-state solution and of the compromises necessary to make it. Is it possible to say the Palestinian side that they have accepted the idea of a Jewish homeland, unequivocally, or that the regional Arab states have either? Mentioning Netanyahu in this audience might not win me a lot of friends, but I'm going to say this, which is when he stood up at Congress recently and he said, Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, said, I stood before my people, it wasn't easy for me, and I said, I will accept the Palestinian state. It's time for President Abbas to stand before his people and say, I will accept a Jewish state. Those 6 words will change history, said Netanyahu. Was he wrong? No, he wasn't.
Okay, well, one of the ways that I want to try and address this question is by suggesting some key flaws and problems in the way that the negotiations have been taking place so far, and indeed kind of critical flaws in the entire so-called peace process that's been going on in some shape or form, you can say, for 20 years. One of the problems that I want to suggest is the power disparity and power inequality between the two sides, language that itself suggests some kind of parity that's not there. It's negotiations around a table between Israel, which is a powerful, modern, well-off state with alliances with key countries, a strong military, etc., etc. And on the other side of the table are representatives, and I'll come back to that in a second, of a stateless, dispossessed, expelled people who are actually occupied by the person on the other side of the table. So this kind of disparity in power relations is problematic in the way that the current peace process conducts itself. And that's compounded by the fact that the states' role, the role that the US has played as the main force behind the so-called peace process now, shaping and kind of leading the two sides, their role is a problematic one because of their bias towards Israel. As a former US State Department diplomat put it, who had been very involved with negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, he said, and actually in retrospect he was including himself in this category, he said US diplomats within the negotiations act as Israel's lawyer. Okay? So not only have you got the power disparity, but you've got the fact that the US kind of is acting for Israel's benefit more than as this kind of equal, neutral arbiter. And I mentioned something about the people on the Palestinian side. There's also been a problem in the peace process with issues to do with representation and legitimacy from the Palestinian leadership point of view. Issues to do with democratic accountability, corruption, who do these people really represent, and that goes to far more fundamental problems to do with the structure of the Palestinian Authority and the PLO and these sort of things. I just wanted to pick up on one of those aspects too, and partly based on what we've heard already, which is this big stress on negotiations. And of course, what negotiations that do take place don't simply happen in isolation. There's things that are happening on the ground, even as people are talking, or not talking, as it were. So if we take the period, for example, defined, generally speaking, as the Oslo years, so from 93 to 2000, so this is pre-Second Intifada, but after there's been the sign of the Declaration of Principles. In theory, it's the time when there's the most optimism about realizing a negotiated solution. Okay? In that period, Israel implemented a regime where Palestinians with West Bank or Gaza ID needed permission to enter Jerusalem. Between 93 and 96, which was a Labour government, there was a 50% rise in the settler population. Remember that all of the settlements are illegal under international law. In this Oslo years, the negotiations taking place, 1,700 Palestinian homes were demolished by court order. So that's an average of about 4 a week while these negotiations are taking place. And by the time you get to 2000, the West Bank's actually been fragmented into over 200 enclaves by Israeli occupation policies. So I give that kind of snapshot to show that while it's okay to talk about talking, in the meantime, Israel is busy creating facts on the ground, busy kind of cementing its colonization of the occupied territories and committing systematic daily and routine abuses of Palestinian human rights. Just to move on to some thoughts about a solution. I'd like to wrap up in a moment. Yeah, sure. Well, I can make it simple. I'd like to suggest that before you get on to specifics, you ground it and root it in a mould of human rights and international law, and you ensure that the individual and collective rights of Jewish Israelis and Palestinians are protected, because it is possible for them to share that land as equals and not base it on some kind of enforced separation. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I just want to echo what Ben has said. I agree with everything he's said wholeheartedly. And even I find myself in a position where it's difficult to disagree with what the gentleman to my right has said as well, about there being the two-state solution with a Jewish home and a Palestinian home. These words sound very nice, but I find there's a certain artificiality about this discussion of two states. And the fact is that on the ground today, or in the last few weeks and months especially, Israel has done everything it can to prevent the emergence of a Palestinian state. Israel has cut funding to the Palestinian Authority, it's cut funding to UNESCO, which is the United Nations Education, Social, Cultural Organization in Paris, when Palestine was admitted as a member about a month ago. Israel is continuing to build settlements. It's in fact building a new settlement in Jerusalem for the first time in 2 decades, and Israel is continuing to expand existing settlements. And It has also threatened recently to disband the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees. So this isn't a government which is interested in a Palestinian state, a functional, viable and democratic state emerging. As for the Arab Peace Initiative, which spoke of two states, a just solution to the refugee problem and a solution to resolving the status of Jerusalem, this was articulated by the Crown Prince at the time of Saudi Arabia in 2002, and it was reiterated by the Arab League a couple of years later, but it's never been officially accepted by the government of Israel. All I want to say is I agree that the final result, the most equitable and most realistic and particular solution is a two-state solution. I just think it needs more than words, and it actually needs an honest third-party broker to bring the two sides together. And as Ben has said, the United States is not an honest broker, and they act more like Israel's lawyer. And until there's a change on that side, I don't see any solution to this conflict in the foreseeable future. Sorry to end on a depressing, pessimistic note. So there you go.
Thanks very much. To echo the point that Ben made, in reality you're not dealing with an equality of power or an equality in negotiations. Israel has one of the world's most powerful armies and arms industries, has very powerful allies in the United States and a vast amount of aid that flows to it from the United States, and it has the power of economic sanctions that are permanently and perpetually applied against the Palestinian people, either through withholding of taxes, the encirclement of Gaza, control of checkpoints, and so the Palestinian economy is constantly strangled by Israel's significant military and economic power. And so there isn't a great equality there. So what can the Palestinian teams negotiate with other than what has happened time after time after time, which is to give away land, to offer to give away more land, to offer to give away land for peace, and so on, whilst at the same time Israel, on the other side of the table, as no stage has ever defined what its borders actually ought to be or are. No Israeli Prime Minister has ever defined their own borders. So I think that's an issue that has to be dealt with. The other ones have already been mentioned. First of all, settlements. Despite all the pressures put on, even by Vice President Biden and President Obama, Israel has continued a completely and totally illegal settlement policy all over the West Bank. The West Bank is divided by settler roads that Palestinian people cannot travel on, and the building of the wall, euphemistically called a separation barrier, divides farmers from their land, divides families from each other, and makes the running of any kind of state on the West Bank impossible. Next up is Gaza, under encirclement and under occupation, and every time I go to Gaza you just want to cry when you see the efforts people are making to try to eke out an existence, whilst the strangulation of the supply of goods, material, food, medicines and everything else into Gaza goes on because of the limited crossings and the continual closure of them, and the frustration of United Nations Relief and Works agencies and Palestinian Red Crescent and everybody else at just trying to get basic medicines through into Gaza is a real issue, and so again an inequality there. And the third